The road goes on forever and the party never ends, says a wall in the back room of the Jeffrey City Church, a church set up for Transamerica cyclists to stay in Jeffrey City, a uranium mining town that boomed and subsequently busted, but remains a place, a destination on the route to cycle across America. And as I pack up my stuff and say goodbye to yet another new friend, where we make promises that you're welcome around anytime and maybe I'll see you again, but you know that aside from the power of the internet, that might not be true. And get on your bike and start pedaling before the process, the party starts all over again and you meet new friends and say goodbye to them as fast as you meet them. It's addicting, the process of saying hi and bye to new friends, and that's where I find myself pedaling off about 2,500 kilometers into my attempt to be the first transgender person to cycle around the world. It's extremely sunny. I have a tailwind finally, and I'm headed to Rawlins today. Currently in Jeffrey City, Wyoming. Amazing place. Stayed at the old church last night. They have a free hostel for cyclists in their basement with lots of awesome graffiti. So it's been about a week since I was in Ennis. I really have no idea if I'm going to be doing videos once a week, once a fortnight, once a month. Maybe I'll just fall off the wagon and never do them again, who knows. But I'm slowly piling up lots of footage, so I suppose the only way to keep on top of it is to keep recording and not think too much about it, which is can be hard at times. I like to make everything really good, but at the same time, timely sometimes is better than good. So yeah, see how we go. So from Ennis, I headed down through Yellowstone, a little bit of Grand Teton National Park, ended up staying in Du Bois. Honestly, I'm not sure what the pronunciation is. I'm sure someone will tell me. And then headed on to Lander, and then from Lander, I ended up at the Jeffrey City famous cyclist hostel. And now I'm headed on to Rawlins, which is the first affordable place to stay aside from the free hostel that I found. So I'm gonna stop and do some admin and edit and upload some videos and all of that good stuff. So yeah, Yellowstone was a bit of a culture shock for me, mostly because you've been in small towns all the way through pretty much from when I started in Vancouver, and all of a sudden there's tourists everywhere. Exactly what people told me would happen definitely happened, which is that you see massive rows of traffic, and as you cycle up to the front of the queue you find out that everyone stopped to take a photo of the animal, and all of a sudden you're way too close to a big animal, and you kind of feel embarrassed on behalf of the animal because of all the humans that are so thrilled to take a photo. Yeah, it was super busy, and I didn't really take many photos in Yellowstone or Teton for that matter, because I guess when I go to places and I see lots of people all taking photos, I kind of start to think, like, what's the point? The best photo has already been taken at this place. Like, what am I adding to the world by also having my own copy of a photo of this place when there are so many? Went and saw a grizzly bear, and heaps of people pulled over to take a photo of the grizzly, and in defiance of everything I've heard about bears up to this point, everyone was way too close to the grizzly bear. So as beautiful as the place it was, I was really happy to get out of there. I think as well lots of people took photos of me, as I was like an interesting animal as well, I suppose. On the way through there was brutal headwinds and crosswinds. Just adds a whole new level of difficulty when you're leaning sideways into a strong crosswind, not trying to get blown into the tourist traffic that's flying by you. Coulter Bay was really expensive, so I ended up just downing a pint of ice cream because that seemed to be the best calories for money. And then headed on out of there and went to Du Bois, and it was improving. Much less stressful people, but still really expensive. I stayed in the dog park and gave the dog park a donation. It was a bit of a naughty camp spot, but the cheapest tent site was pretty much the equivalent of 65 New Zealand dollars with dodgy Wi-Fi and a patch of grass and not much else. So did a little nighttime bivvy there. Then went to Lander. Lander's very impressive. Another kind of 50 kilometers of headwind where I was chugging away at 9 kilometers an hour, and eventually got in. Went to the dumpsters and managed to get my best dumpster dive ever at Lander. Got tomatoes, avocados, eggplant, cake, apples. Got some. There was about 50 melons in the trash, and I couldn't bring myself not to take one, so I took a whole cantaloupe as well. So yeah, the United States is very wasteful. It seems pretty easy to dumpster dive, except in certain spots where the bins have been locked. It's harder when you're bikepacking, so I got a little container of dishwashing liquid for cleaning things up. But I've kind of been waiting till I get out of grizzly bear country before I do it, because it's so hard to keep all the delicious dumpster smells under control, and I think bears would love the smell of a dumpster on two wheels. So yeah, a little treat for me getting out of bear country and getting to have an epic dumpster dive. I mean, a lot of people seem thrilled by the dumpster diving. So in Lander, I stayed at the city park, which is an awesome camp spot, and had a pretty slow morning because I needed to prep a bunch of dumpster food, replace the chain on my bike at the bike shop, and post some stuff that I've been biking around with that I really didn't need, and that's given me a bit more peace. At the bike shop, they were selling headphones as well, so I finally have headphones. So I've been smashing out a bunch of audiobooks. Now I'm in Wyoming. I only got another day in Wyoming before I make it to Colorado, and then headed on east to the coast. Trying to pick the best way from Denver. Not really sure yet. So from Lander, I headed over to Jeffrey City, which is an old boom and bust uranium mining town. Has a small population still living there. Amazing pottery shop, Byron's Pottery, Monk King, and it has this church that has been hosting trans am cyclists. The church is like one of the places that I was really looking forward to visiting because it's so iconic. Such a cool spot to go. The walls are just covered in graffiti from all of the cyclists that have passed through, talking about who they are and where they're going. And yeah, I had good intentions to do a lot more admin last night, but I just ended up walking around and reading all the graffiti that was on the wall. Yeah, from here I'm just pedaling. One thing about this world record is that I have to constantly be out to people everywhere I go. Back home most of the time I was as well, because I'm like proud of being trans, so I identify more as that than just a guy. And I guess as well, up until now I haven't had as much facial hair, so my facial hair has really changed how much I just pass as a weird little guy now. Yeah, the nature of this record, first openly transgender person to circumnavigate the world on a bicycle, means that usually I grab a witness, at least one witness every single day. And that means that I have to tell people all the time. In New Zealand, that's pretty safe, but in America, it's not as safe because of the number of attacks against trans people and the queer community as a whole by right-wing politicians. And this is materialized in various things like restrictions and bans on gender-affirming care in certain states, bathroom bans. It's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, when I was going across Canada, I didn't really get many reactions, but in the state, because of the fact that I have to constantly be telling people about my record, I'm starting to get a bit of a survey on what people think about trans people. I mean, every now and then, I think people just don't even understand what I'm talking about because the trails are called the Trans-Canadian and the Trans-American. So I think some people just think that it's another word for cycling around the world and don't actually realize what I'm talking about. But no, a lot of people do, especially if I need them to sign my book. I feel like most cyclotourists I've met have been very supportive, good allies. A few folks have trans family members themselves, and that's awesome. I'd love to be able to talk to those people. Then I have like folks that I bump into who aren't cyclotourists who they're usually the ones that have more interesting opinions. Even folks that are seemingly democratic leaning will have some like uninclusive opinions. And I know that most people don't mean it, and it's just the way the discourse is in the media. I don't think they see easily how their thoughts are hurtful because it's just so prevalent here. And the two opinions that I come up against the most are, of course, the classic one, because I'm a trans person in sports, is people talking about trans women competing in sport. And the other one is, especially in America, like this, you guys are obsessed with this shit, really, is that lots of people are against non-binary people and they-them pronouns, and they think that they-them is ruining the English language, which, you know, should go without saying. It isn't. They-them, singular they-them, has been used for hundreds of years. Pretty much since they-them was invented, it was used singularly. You saw some keys on the table, you'd say, oh, someone left their keys behind. Singular they. So yeah, that one fascinates me, and this is not even calling out any specific person. I've heard this constantly, and I don't bother telling people that those are actually my pronouns. I use they, them, and he, him. I prefer they, them. I think they, them is a wonderful pronoun. It implies lots of possibilities. It's really easy to use. Talking to my one of my former coworkers with visual disability, they, them is not just useful for the trans community. It's also useful if you, you know, you can't see people and you're working with them online, and lots of names aren't particularly clear on what gender that person is. So they, them works really great in our online world as well. Also a little bit of like a weird, like, hey, pick a lane kind of thing, which, I don't know, I find that like very tiring, I suppose. Kind of like, yeah, you've got to put people in boxes, that sucks. But yeah, I like to think that a lot of the research out there suggests that a lot of transphobia comes from people who have never known a trans person, especially an adult one. And so I figure maybe that person can be me. You know, openly trans people kind of are just doing activism by existing, because our existence is politicized. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, our existence is political when we exist openly. And I don't mean political in any sense of left or right, but that political in the sense that we change the way the world works. Transness often is disliked by folks on the conservative end of the spectrum because it suggests that we could live in a different way. We could choose not to conform. We could choose not to obey the rules that have been set out for us, and we could be happy. And especially in places like the United States, where there's a lot of conservatism, especially religious conservatism, that stuff's frightening. And I don't mean that because, you know, because transness is frightening, but more on an existential level. So Judith Butler talks about phantasms, and more recently, Fantasmic thinking has been covered by Abigail Thorne as well. So if you haven't caught those, amazing videos. But basically, phantasmic thinking is when you substitute one problem for another. And so with transness and hatred of trans people, sometimes it can be about not us as a community, but the fact that by admitting that trans people can exist, you're also admitting that you may have chosen wrong. So if, say, you're someone who is unhappy in your straight cis hetero marriage, unhappy with your job, unhappy with your outcomes in life, accepting that trans people exist means accepting that there are other decisions that could have been made, that your life is not on rails. And I think that's where a lot of the hatred comes from, and is really easy to incite. On some level, we're strange and confronting, but on another level, we change the world. And yeah, it's cool to think about. It's one of the reasons why I think it's an absolute privilege to be trans, but it is hard, and having to talk to a different person about it every single day can get quite hard, because you never know when you're gonna run into someone with like terrible opinions. But in saying that, these days, because you know this is America, as long as they just have terrible opinions and I can leave, it's not so bad. So yeah, we'll see whether things change as I keep traveling south and east. I know I'm in a pretty conservative area. A little bit of virtue, so you can personally feel like you're the good guy, you're being inclusive, but you can also maintain that hierarchy of power by having a caveat to that. And I'm always skeptical, especially people who talk about language and respectability politics, and how we're acting is always a bit of a red flag. But also, I don't think folks do it consciously. They just do it. They do it without even realizing they're doing it, and that's what makes it so dangerous, I suppose. Is that I know I have probably done it in the past as well. That big but, and yeah, I think it's something that you should look out for in your life. If you're an ally to any group of people, why are you saying but? So back home we had this neighbor, and he really didn't like the tree that was on our side of the fence. we were renting, so it's not really our decision, but he wanted to cut the tree down. But in New Zealand, you can't just go around cutting native trees down, so we were against it, and we were also against it because he would come over and knock on the door and tell us this big long story about how he was going to cut it down. Tree has not been cut down, thankfully, though I don't live there anymore. But he would come over and first preface it with, "I'm trying to be a good neighbor." And it's the same theory as that word "but." When you say you're trying to be a good neighbor, you put the blame on the other person. So if you then turn around and say, "Well, I don't want you to cut my tree down, but he was just trying to be a good neighbor." And so this is what happens with people who say they're allies as well, is that, you know, trying to say you want to be an ally is not the same as being an ally. But it puts us in positions where sometimes we want to clap back against people not actually being allies, but proclaiming they are. That can be a lot harder than just clapping back against someone who hasn't said that. So, yeah, that can be pretty interesting. Yeah, anyway, I'll keep you posted.